Good afternoon and good morning to those on the West Coast. I am Aisha Brown, the Foundation and Inclusion Director here at the AD Club. In honor of Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, we're super excited to have you join us as we continue the crucial conversation surrounding AAPI awareness. Today, we will hear perspectives of current AAPI executive leaders who will share their career journeys and thoughts on ways we can increase and improve visibility of the AAPI community in our industry. Throughout the panel discussion, please use the chat to submit questions for our Q&A. If you are interested in becoming a member of the Advertising Club of New York or want to check out our amazing content, please log on to theadvertisingclub.org. If you are tweeting, our handle is @ClubNY. Special thanks to our AAPI committee and our moderator, Rick Song, for helping us bring this panel to fruition. Rick is a current board member here at the Advertising Club of New York and Senior Vice President and Group Head Digital at Nielsen. I leave you all in exceptional hands. Over to you, Rick.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Advertising Club in New York. It's really exciting to be here today with an esteemed panel of panelists, which I'm humbled to be here to moderate a great discussion on executive leadership in the AAPI community. To kick it off, we want to hear from our panelists, and I'll give them a minute or so to kind of introduce themselves. Why don't we just kick off and start with Devika.
Hello, hi Rick. Hello, everybody. So I'm also a board member of the AD Club and absolutely love the organization. And for all of you who are not, or your organizations are not, I suggest you go to your leadership and ask them that you'd like your organization to become a member. Anyway, I'm Devika Bulchandani. Everybody calls me Dev. It's much easier than saying my whole name. You know my current job, or it's somewhere in all the materials. I mean, I just figured I'd tell you a little bit about myself, not from a career perspective, because we're going to talk a lot about that, just from a personal perspective. I was born, raised, grew up in India. I've lived here for 27 years. And I have 2 children. I'm married to an Indian man, so we raise a family living here. And sort of my biggest objective is to raise my children to be 100% Indian and 100% American, because this is where they live. And we'll talk a lot more about what all of that means for us as human beings and leaders. Great.
Thanks, Devika. And thanks for that plug in the AD Club. I'm going to get heat for not doing that as well.
I got your back.
Thanks. Cynthia, on to you.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Chen. I am currently the president of North America Health at Reckitt. Our company has about $20 billion in revenue globally, with $64 billion in market cap. You may not know the company, but I'm sure you know our brands. So we have the world's most trusted and loved brands in health, nutrition, but also hygiene, such as Lysol, Airwick, Mucinex, KY, Durex, lots of interesting brands. I am really excited to be here to spend next 1 hour with all of you here today. Now I'm also in the club, Rick. Hopefully I'm also in the club, yeah?
Of course, everyone's in the club now. Thank you, Cynthia. Coming live from the West Coast, Bill Imada.
Hello, Rick, and hello, AD Club of New York. I'm really happy to be here with this distinguished group. I'm the chairman and co-founder of IW Group. We're a multicultural advertising, marketing, and PR firm. I'm from Los Angeles, but I was born in a small town in Eastern Oregon, right on the Oregon-Idaho border. So I often say I'm from the far east, the far eastern part of Oregon. And we're part of the Interpublic group of companies, and I'm in the McCann Erickson or McCann World Group silo. And I'm looking forward to this conversation today. So thanks, Rick, and thanks, AD Club, for having us.
Thank you, Bill. And our next West Coast participant, Helen, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. I'm Helen Lowe. I'm a Senior Vice President of Marketing at Schwab. And the team that I lead is really sitting at the intersection of marketing, digital, as well as experience design. So I think my experience is a little bit different from everyone else, which is really exciting. So I'm really excited to be here to join the conversation. And I'll just mention something following Dev's example. I was born in Shanghai, China, and I came here when I was 12. So my journey has been really, truly one of the great, American story. And I'm happy to share some of that later on.
Thank you, Helen. And rounding out our esteemed group of panelists, Wanda.
Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. I have most recently been the Chief Marketing Officer of Samsung Electronics America. And prior to that, I worked for Disney. And also I was the head of marketing for ESPN. Fantastic. I can't tell you how many men I would meet along the way that would say, "You have my dream job," they would say with a tremor in their voice. And prior to that, I worked at Walmart. I was there for 8 years and had a great, fantastic time learning so much about retail. Just a quick couple of points about my background. My mother is Japanese, first generation, and there are a lot of things that I learned along the way from her. She is now 92. I am the youngest of 6 children. I was the surprise child that came along. And so the siblings I have are much, much older than me, but she actually survived World War II. And so my father died when I was actually 5. And so what I learned about watching her learn how to drive and then enter the workforce, the stories of kind of her hardship is what taught me many of the things that I applied during my career journey that we're going to talk about today. So I'm really excited to be here with you and to have this conversation because it's one that is needed, long overdue for the industry. So let's get going.
Thank you, Wanda. Wow, thank you for sharing that story. Your mom sounds like an inspiring woman. So
she's a firecracker is what I'll tell you.
So, and thank you all for being here. It's really an honor to sit amongst you. As we come to the close of AAPI Heritage Month, where the backdrop for today's discussion is a report from Cal State University just last month, which states in Q1 that hate crimes against Asian Americans in 16 major US cities were up 164%. StopAAPI.org reports that 6,600 incidents, hate incidents against Asians happened in March alone. That's about double year over year. On May 19th, Congress passed the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which provides resources for investigating hate crimes, particularly against the Asian community. So I thought we'd just start off with that point since it's very current. How significant is the passing of this legislation? And in your mind, what does that signal to the Asian American community? Wanda, do you want to kick it off?
Yep, I think that one of the things that I think the community has long been aware of is that, number one, the statistics you quoted, first of all, everyone is well aware that most likely these are underreported. So the numbers are most likely far higher than what you've just quoted. Number two, this creates substantiation and validation for the AAPI community because of the fact that it has not been visible, it's not been reported, it is generating the kind of awareness and knowledge. And hopefully what's going to happen now is it's the action that's going to have to be chosen by communities. But when now federal legislation is going to happen, the resources that are going to need to get structure put in place to go address what will have to change for protection, to see the kinds of citizens that are bystanding and not knowing how to react, it has to be able to change when you are fearful. My daughter was actually in New York she was assisting on a photo shoot, and one of the models was she was in her 60s. And as she left the photo shoot, she said, "I'm pulling out a can of mace to leave." She's an Asian woman and she's leaving New York City. And as she was leaving, I said, at least you guys needed to have assisted this woman as she left the shoot. And this is New York City. She shouldn't have to have left a photo shoot to worry for her safety and worry that somebody should assist her. This is just a normal, everyday woman. This is the kind of reality that people are living with today. And so, we were having our prep meeting for this event and recognized that legislation should hopefully put in place. place. I think the concern at this moment is how quickly, as we see legislation put in place, does it move to action with local communities and with the local police organizations, so that we're actually going to see this move to what happens today and tomorrow to move this into something that's going to be true support.
Well said. Well said. Putting that legislation into action is going to be super critical, and it's disheartening that in my news feeds I see every day there's another incident, usually of fairly violent nature. So hopefully this legislation helps. Devika, did you have any thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, look, legislation is always the most important thing because it legitimizes an issue, and it's also accountability, right? One of the things we need is when people are not held accountable and there's no consequence, the crimes and the hate goes on. And with accountability and the legitimacy of that issue, that's a step forward. But that's one step forward, right? There's a lot more that we need to do as society. And I think, the law is one of the most important foundational things. But as a society, there is so much more work that we need to do at a community level, at a local level, on how are our children being taught in schools, right? It starts there because I've raised 2 children here. I came here as an immigrant. And it was a very interesting sort of juxtaposition for me. I came from a majority, I was part of the majority. And then I came here and all of a sudden I'm part of a minority. And it was a very, very weird transition. But then I'm raising 2 children here who are dealing with issues at school, right? And I know we're going to talk about microaggressions. So the law is one thing, which is very important, but the values of all of us as communities, as, and all different issues and how we teach our children. I sort of always say I'm obsessed about what the next generation does because it's really hard to change a 50-year-old's mind. But if we really want the world to move forward, we've all got to make sure that the children of tomorrow are not going to grow up with the same sort of hate in their hearts or the same sense of difference and the same sense of privilege.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think the statement that it makes that it's not okay, right? And somehow in the recent, era of the pandemic, the xenophobia against Asian Americans, because it's, because of the pandemic, somehow it's been justified in the minds of people. And at least to your point, this is an inflection point and, a statement that says, hey,
it's not okay.
Not okay. It's not okay. Bill, did you have any thoughts on the legislation?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thanks to New York and Representative Grace Meng for being one of the people that introduced this legislation and managed to get bipartisan support for it. But I was also really happy to see that they are providing the support in various languages so that people that are the most vulnerable in our community have an opportunity to be able to report these incidents and hate crimes in a language that they feel most comfortable in. But like everyone else said, I love the legislation, but I'm a little worried that it doesn't have enough teeth. And so I have a little bit of a concern about that. It's one thing to get it passed. It's another thing to get the enforcement that we need, the muscle behind it. And I have to say that when we move into this conversation later on about representation, I'm seeing some really bad statistics as we try to promote people in the ad industry, and we're making some progress there. We're actually losing a large number of Asian Americans who want to go into the field of law. And the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association actually did a study that showed that 28% drop between just a short amount of time between 2011 and 2019. If we don't have enough people going to the field of law, we're not going to have enough people that are going to pursue judgeships, which are going to provide that teeth that we need with this legislation.
Rick, you're on mute.
I'm muting myself. It's so cliche. Sorry, guys. It's a great point, Bill. And I think it's a great segue to our discussion around leadership, right? Because the reality is this group has bucked the trend, right? In terms of leadership in this country from a corporate perspective. So Cynthia, why don't we kick off with you? What are some of the key insights you can share about your experience in this industry And from when, you know, kind of you started your career, and I know you've actually worked in both Asia and the US, but from when you started a career and worked in this country to now, and then are there any, and this, again, a question for the group, is there a specific challenge or a moment in time that because of your ethnicity, you had to overcome it? So kind of a total encompassing question, but feel free to answer however you see fit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody has a challenge. For me, it's intersectionality. It's being a female, but also being a people of color. Mm-hmm. I actually think that most of the times, it's not because of people of color, it's actually because of a female. If you look at a Fortune 500 companies right now, we are at an all-time high. We have 41 global CEOs. However, it's still at a 7 to 8%. So most of the time, if you look at the top companies and the top 40, top 30, majority of that is still white male. And I think that the second part of challenge for me was expectation, because most of the people, when you walk into a room, they think about the Asian woman leader, typically will be quiet. Now, suddenly I have a strong POV. I am fearless. So that, suddenly they don't know how to take it because you are not the norm. So at the beginning of my career, it was difficult really to say, hey, how we're gonna move forward, right? So I feel like a ceiling. What I figured out may work or may not work for everyone was building the alliances, because you are a different, you quickly realize you're different, right? So not thinking that you think you're the same, it is not the right way to go. So I recognized, I acknowledged them. Just like, Devika, you were talking about when you were in India, you're a minority, you are majority. When I was in China, by the way, I'm also from Shanghai, I was the majority. I came here, suddenly I become minority. So I want to make sure people around me understand me. I spend time to build that relationship, building that alliances, so that they know, oh, now I know that there are a group of people, AAR people, they're actually very strong, opinionated, and they are fearless, right? And so it becomes, norm acceptable. Last but not least, I would say that don't only look for mentor. We have to look for a sponsor. Mentor will teach you, say what's good, what's not good. Sponsors are the people really will open the door, open the opportunities for you, right? So again, summarize that for me is really trying to build alliances, making sure people understand where I'm coming from, why I'm who I am. Secondly, and throughout your career, have sponsors who will actually provide the opportunity for you.
That's great, and we have 4 women who are breaking that barrier, both being Asian and being female, which is amazing. Helen, what about you? So in your career, how has things evolved, and are there any specific challenges you would highlight that you had to overcome because of both being a woman and being an Asian American?
Yeah, I'll mention 2 things. The first one is going to sound very similar to Cynthia. I'll tell the story. When I first started in brand management, in my first review, it was very positive. I was given the indication that I could get promoted, or actually it was the second promotion, but I was told that I was not aggressive enough. Because when I first came to this country, I didn't have any English background. So my whole goal was to just fit in, to assimilate. And yet I was told I was not aggressive enough. So I was given a model of how to be more aggressive. And so of course, being a good student, I'm like, I can do this. I can be aggressive. How aggressive do you want me to be? And that worked out for me until I got to more senior level. And then I was told, you're too aggressive. You come across as too territorial. You're just standing out too much, basically. And I think it is really about expectation. The ideal leader profile on the one hand is aggressive, charismatic, outgoing, and who got us through your opinion. But then there's the stereotype of being a woman of color, particularly, I think, Asian women. There's just an expectation that you're not going to stand out too much. And so I think that dissonance really made people react very negatively, and yet they didn't even know that they were doing that. And so as Cynthia said, the building alliance is really how I overcame that. So on a one-on-one basis, really sharing with people where I came from, my intentionality, and that by working together, finding common grounds. That really.
Yeah, that's a great point, Helen. I think the first not being aggressive enough and then being perceived as overly aggressive. You know, I can tell you, starting my career in the early 90s as an East Asian American in sales, right, in media sales, there was not a lot of us. And so I felt like every day I'd walk in a room and someone was like, you know, there was a double take. It's definitely evolved over time, but I totally understand and can empathize with, you know, kind of the expectations or stereotypes, and then, you know, perhaps even overtaking those stereotypes and then getting a different negative kind of response.
Rick, can I? Yeah. I have.
Please jump in. Everyone, please jump in.
I have a similar story, and I think I was talking to my boss and white man, and I was talking about my future, my career, and he said to me, he said, you know what, Dev, the problem is that you're seen as too aggressive, and I could feel the heat in my body, right, and just the anger wanted to sort of take over, but at the same time, you know, my brain was saying to me, this is your moment. Like, this is the moment to crack a door open and have empathy and make them realize how they're sort of stereotyping. So after like a 2-minute awkward silence, I just looked at him and I said, I just want to know one thing. Would you say that to a man? And we had 2 minutes of awkward silence, and he looked at me and he said, you're right. And I said, an aggressive man is, yeah, you're a winner, right? And an aggressive woman, oh my God, she's a bitch, right? That's just the truth.
Yeah.
Right? But I think the lesson I learned through this story, and I think we all have this similar story, is to take these moments and make them moments of learning for the other person too, because very often what we do, and it's very uncomfortable, but often what we do is either we retreat, right? Because we're different that moment. And again, you've been made to feel even more different. We retreat, or we get angry. And I've really taught myself over the years to say, how do I channel that moment into a positive outcome so that the one who's going to come behind me doesn't have to hear again that, oh my God, you're so aggressive.
Yeah, it's such a great point. Cynthia, did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I'm very passionate about this, right? So since today's topic about career, you know, I've been through, you know, Deb, when you were talking about this, I felt like, you know, I've been there so many times, right? So I can totally echo everything you just said. But what I taught myself, which has worked for me, I want to share with everyone here today is, in order for us to carry forward, we're going to have purpose. We always have to come back to say, what would you really want? What is destination for me? Because all these are noises. Let me tell you this, right? Even to our level, you will still have a lot of noises like that. The question is that, are you taken over by this feedback, this unfair feedback, or you carry forward, you say, you know what? I want to be a trailblazer. I want to be helpful for other people. I want to show other people there's a way for women leaders, people of color to get there. So all these are noises, right? So I learned over the years to really block this out and focus on what I'm trying to achieve, right? Which for me is always deliver top tier sustainable growth, but also build a great place to work. At least within my team, I have this fair, diversified kind of environment that people can grow, right? So all these noises, they are all gonna fall, right? But I'm gonna continue to march towards that purpose. That's how I get to, you know, it helped me to get to today.
Well said. And I think, and Devika made a really good point, is that those moments when you can actually, you can actually instill a different thinking, right? You can instill different awareness. You can contradict what the sentiment is, makes a big difference, right? For everyone behind you moving forward. I think that was a great point. Bill, you mentioned microaggressions, and we're actually just talking about different examples of microaggressions. Do you want to share your experiences, you know, either or, right? So challenges that you've had to overcome throughout your leadership, throughout your career and as a leader, as well as the topic of microaggressions.
Yeah, so I made a few mistakes when I started my career, and I decided to go back to a larger agency. And one of the first things they said to me at age 27 was I was too old. And I said, okay, great. And so I agreed to take a temp to perm with this very large agency. And I'd say the very first thing that happened to me was the president of the agency walked over to my desk and said, Bill, we have some guests from China coming to visit. What do Chinese people like to eat? And I was just flabbergasted by that question. I said, why are you asking me? And he said, because look around, is there anybody that looks like you in this organization? There's over 100 people in this agency. And I said, no, but I have no idea what Chinese people like to eat. Probably Chinese food. And he goes, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And then he actually, whenever we had major corporations coming by, I would be elevated from my cubicle next to the men's room and put into an office because these well-meaning corporations would say, we want to see the diversity of your company. So the Latinx gentleman in the mailroom and I got elevated to offices, but we were not allowed to engage the clients. And one smart client actually came by and said, we want to meet Bill and the your Latinx person. And that person walked over to my desk and said, Bill, really excited to meet you. The president of the company says that you're from the Far East. I lived in Korea and Japan and China and India. What part of the Far East are you from? And I said, Ontario, Malheur County, Oregon, right on the border of Oregon and Idaho, or Eastern Oregon. And after that, the president of that agency never did that to me again. So like the women, we've had to deal with all of this bias that was thrown to us, but we also had to work 10 times harder than anybody else to even be noticed. And so that was always a problem for us.
So I guess to everyone, in terms of microaggressions and again, that's a more overt, but like aggressively overt example of bias and discriminatory practices. But I think microaggressions, if you're a person of color of any ethnicity, you learn to live with it, right? And I think there's a different moment in time 30 years ago and 20 years ago and 10 years ago. And so I know for me, personally, it's changed. And I think often when I started my career, you kind of let things go, right? Because you don't want to stand out. You don't want to cause a disruption and you kind of just learn to live with it. But to Bill's point, you still have to operate at a higher level. You still have to outperform your counterparts to see any kind of progression or recognition. And God forbid you make a mistake, right? But I do think the whole notion of microaggressions or those biases do have an impact on our work environment. They do have an impact on our morale, on whether we pursue a certain industry or a career. So are there some other examples that you can share, Wanda? You had a deep career in the industry. What can you share with us in terms of how you had to overcome or face those challenges?
Yeah, I think that when, there was a word that, Cynthia used when you talk about intersectionality, I think that, there are all kinds of intersectionality points that, different ethnicities face. If you are not in the club, one of the factors that I looked at early on in my career is, I would just watch different groups where it's like, they went to that university. And so those men sort of fit into sort of that group. And so I was not in the club. And so I would just watch, I was left out of the conversation and realized how much I didn't fit in for that reason. Sometimes, it's the club who golfs together and, or I was left out of the conversation when it was the men talking about sports. And there's a series of intersections that you just don't fit into. And sometimes it's, what you don't fit into. And as a result, you just sort of have to look at yourself and say, all right, so the place, sometimes we think of ourselves, the overused term of model minority, because the way that you believe that you're going to get there, as it's often written about, is that, Asians are going to outperform. And so what you just went to, Rick, is you talked about the fact it's the high performance that gets you there. There's a recent article that talked about the fact, it was actually tied to the finance industry, is there's a reason why sometimes they're not making it to the boardroom, they're not making it to the C-suite. And it's because of those clubs that they don't fit into, because a lot of times the way that they're making it to the C-suite is because some of those deals are being made at the country club or they're being made on the golf course, where some of us aren't in those clubs. And I think that that's what ultimately is going to have to change, is that we have to be able to see that the transparency of these business deals, or the transparency of how you be able to make it in, is going to be able to just allow for those relationships to not supersede where executives are being asked in to put more AAPI representation into that C-suite. And I think that, the overall ask has continued to be, how do you get the diversity at the table, at the C-suite and at the boardroom? And, I've been asked to join more and more boards. That's continued to change for me over the course of the last year, over the last several months. And I think that we have to continue to ask for it. So I think that one of the questions that we've said as we were preparing for this panel is, we have to see more AAPI participants, and you have to raise your hand. And so, as Cynthia said, ask for sponsorship. It's not just this kind of mentorship, but I think that the way in is be active and participate. And that is an untraditional way sometimes for, I think, in some of the cultures to say, I'm inherently shy, and maybe you don't have that personality to be able to try to do that. And so I think that this concept of trying to figure out how to develop your networking skills, that's kind of what's at heart here, is trying to break through and find what's natural for you to network your way in. That's ultimately how you sort of have to develop your own personal skill set to get into that, because you're not always going to be invited into the club.
Yeah, well said. And I think I want to point that to the rest of you, right? Because to Wanda's point, it is very challenging, but you're all examples of folks who did it. So for our audience, is there a tip or two you can share? If they're folks of Asian American persuasion that want to pursue leadership roles, pursue executive leadership roles, what's a tip or two that you can give them to get started?
So Rick, I'll chime in and maybe offer two things. One is, I think we have to ask for it. And Wanda, you're absolutely right. It is very opaque. I think in the beginning, especially Asian Americans, we don't have trouble getting in the building, as I say, but we have a lot of trouble rising to the top of the building. In fact, the data and various studies have shown that out of all the underrepresented groups, we are possibly not underrepresented when we get into the building, but we're the most underrepresented as a ratio of all employees in the company at the top. And so I think it's really about solving for that and getting rid of the opacity. So I had to ask, what does it take to get to the next level? And to my surprise, it is not about performance. I mean, of course it is. Like, we need to continue to show the performance, that's a given. But it is about talking to all the people who will have a vote and knowing who those people are and building the relationship. And it's not like ill will, they just didn't know me. So like creating visibility not for myself, but for my team, and making those relationships feel personal, that was so important. And that's the club, Wanda, that you're talking about. So our question to ourselves is, how can we get in the club without being in the club? And I think creating that visibility and asking the questions to make it transparent to ourselves is a really first step. And it's something we all do, I mean, sometimes we say, how can we change systematic problems? But there are some things that we could do.
I think that's a really, really good point. I mean, for the longest time, I didn't know I had to say I wanted to run a company. I didn't know that I had to actually say it. And when I said it, well, one, I have to tell you, it felt great being able to say it. But in my mind, if I said it was a bad thing. And once I said it, that transparency and acknowledgement to say, oh, this person wants to do that, because they don't think of you that way.
Yeah.
They do not think of you that way.
Yeah. Cynthia, were you trying to add something?
I was trying to say, it seems that we are all passionate about this, right? So I would say that, I want to be part of the club, but if we don't have the club, if I'm not in that club, I want to build my own club, right? So this is what we are talking about. And a lot of times when in a company and you think, okay, this is my people, right? My people, you think that these people will actually push you up. But I have, a lot of, times that your own people actually will not help you. So for me, the first step is that we as Asian Americans, we need to help each other, right? For me, super, super important. Secondly, when we help each other, because I believe on the top, it is not only one position, right? So many positions are available. Now, this is a great start. Now we have 6 panelists or 7 people here. We can start to build our own club and help each other. I think Helen and Bill, we were in this club with Adia, right? And I think that the second step is that not only have a club, but also help each other. Create awareness, super, super important. So if I know there's a job there, I'll say, hey, I think Helen is a great, great candidate, right? So since last year, Bill and Helen know, I started profiling the fantastic business leaders who happen to be of Asian origin, right? So far I have profiled 35. I will not stop. I will refuse to stop. I actually also put together, I always like to show this because it's show and tell. When everybody is going virtual, I want to go to physical. And this is a book I put together. Rick is part of that, but we're gonna have edition. This is edition number 1. We're gonna have edition number 2, number 3. We have to create awareness, help each other, because there are so many opportunities out there. Wanda, if there's a board opportunity I see fits you so well, I say, hey, Wanda, have you, this is good for you. So to summarize that to me is that if they don't want me, then I'll build my own club. And we help each other, create awareness. And last but not least, networking is the money. Networking, especially when you go to a certain level, is so much more important than anything else.
Yeah, well said. I'll hand it over to Bill. Bill, in your Ad Age piece, your op-ed piece in March, you talked about the importance of storytelling to address the myths and misconceptions surrounding the AAPI community. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of storytelling and how it kind of relates to our topic of aspiring leadership?
Well, first of all, each and every person that is on the video conference today, including the panelists, have a story. And you already heard part of that story this afternoon, this morning. And I think one thing that's really important is we need to find a platform like Cynthia and Helen and all these, and Devika said, and Wanda, that we have to find a platform to be able to tell those stories and share those stories, because the more people learn about us, the more people are going to be less likely to attack us on the streets and more likely, as Helen said, to invite us into these clubs and organizations. But I also want to have a shout out to Karina, because she was talking about the importance of allyship, and allyship is critical here. We need our Black and our Hispanic and our white and Jewish and LGBT allies to speak up for us and to invite us in, to pull us into conversations. And we need to do the same for them. And so that storytelling and that story living is really critical for us to move forward, but also to demystify things about us, like this model minority myth, that this perpetual foreigner, because we are here to stay. We want to contribute, and we want to be in the senior most ranks of these organizations leading.
Yeah, well said. So I want to switch gears for a moment and talk about representation. The media's reflection of culture, advertising reflection of media. According to Nielsen's latest Grace Inclusion Analytics data, 2/3 of the top 10 programs on broadcast, cable, and SVOD that are watched by Asian American viewers have 0 Asian American representation, 2/3. While Asian Americans make up 6% of the population, among the top 100 cable programs in 2020, the share of screen was just 2.2%. So that's kind of in the context of content, but obviously advertising is important as well. How are we doing? Let's fast forward to today. How are we doing today from your opinions as executives in this industry, both from an advertising perspective and what do we need to do to progress things further? Wanda, do you want to start with that one?
This is an ongoing conversation with creators. Gina Davis had worked on this with. She's been doing this fight in Hollywood for years on women, and she was personally working on this when she was in front of the camera. She would walk behind the camera and have a conversation with the first and second AD and say, why is the remote in the hand of the boy? Could we just put that in the hand of the girl? And the whole conversation behind the efforts that she was working on is, if you can see it, you can be it. It is all about representation. And so it does start with every marketing manager who is in charge of developing content. It's all about how do you do casting, and it's the conversations that you're having with your agencies. And so it is every brand manager who is working on every campaign. It's a conversation that has to happen inside of every marketing team. The more that every marketing manager is asking to have this with their boss, it's like, did we consider what our diverse talent pool looks like inside of our agencies? inside of how we cast, inside of every piece of content that we're requesting, then the more that conversation happens. And then in terms of upstream content development, when we're having those conversations with all of our publisher partners, and then we work with all of our agency ecosystem, then that's the message that's being sent. So all of that request has to happen through every content conversation that's going to happen. When I was working with Walmart, we would go have upstream content conversations and planning, and then only sponsor those kinds of things that what our brand was going to be on. We knew our brand performed better when we were sponsoring the kind of content that was great for families. So that's the work that we did. And, that's the kind of conversation that brands have to basically put their money where their mouth is. So that's the whole supply chain of content and advertising that has to work together to make sure that the diversity of content representation of the right audiences, and that's for all audiences, right? It's not just AAPI. As Bill was saying, we are going to represent audiences equally, and that's across the board.
Yeah, well said. Devika, you're leading one of the largest global agencies, advertising agencies in the world, working with some of the top global brands, and been in role relatively recently. What's the approach from your perspective? Oh, you're on mute. I got you this time.
we do it every time. Right? Look, here's sort of the blunt reality of this. We need diversity in the agency world, not because it's the right thing to do, and it is, but it's a business imperative, right? To Wanda's point, if we want to get the right representation, I need the right people to create it. I'm going to give you one example, and it's not an example of an AAPI audience, but it might as well have been. It's a simple print ad for a bank. What do? There's a black bank teller, and there's a white person who's going and getting the money. What are the semiotics of that? The white person has the money, and the black person is in the service role. Right? Now, if you don't have a black person in that team, if you don't have an AAPI person, you don't have a person from China, you don't have a person from India, you don't have an LGBTQ member, you don't have a transgender person, how do you come up with the authenticity of that content and not just do sort of, just whatever form of washing that we tend to do? So from my perspective, it is a business imperative to have the most diverse agency, to hire different. And not when we bring them in, because one of the things I'll tell you, which is an industry problem, we talk diversity, but when we bring them in, we want conformity. Then we want all the diversity to start thinking like everybody else. Right? So we're going to hire diversity, and I'm going to get people from a different socioeconomic background. But the minute they come in, the first performance review they get, they're like, well, the way you talk is not good for our clients. Yeah, but the person grew up in a different situation.
Yeah.
Ooh, I just have
Bill,
to say,
I was going to say, Bill, what's your perspective from your agency view?
I just want to echo what Dev said, but also I want to tell the agencies that are out there that now more of the review committees for business are diverse. I mean, it is not unusual for us to pitch business and see Black, Latinx, right, Asian, and LGBT community people evaluating. And that one of the questions they ask now is, where's the diversity? Show it to us. What are you doing? And so we're seeing more of that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Bill, just to stay on that for a second, since you were a pioneer kind of in multicultural agency space, how has it kind of progressed? How has it evolved in the last decade or so?
Well, I'm really excited because a lot of the mass market agencies, including Devika's agency, are more diverse. And we love that. That's what we hope to see, is these mass market agencies having people like her at the senior most roles. And I think companies are now expecting this, and moving forward in the next, a few years, we're going to see that diversity show itself in not only in the ads that we're doing, but also in the committees that review business. And so we're excited about it. And the ad agencies that focus on multicultural are also excited to see this change throughout the industry.
Helen, do you want to chime in from the, oh, sorry, go ahead,
one
Deb.
other point, I used to always have this presentation when we were, after 2017, that I want people to stop thinking of me or wanting me at the table because I have a vagina, but think of putting me at the table because of dollar signs. It's good for business. It's not, so, and I think we need to force that shift. We really need to force that shift because more and more we are learning that consumer behavior is going that way. And I like forcing that shift because commerce, by the way, the minute you attach commerce to it, all these issues will be solved way quicker.
Yeah, well said. And we're just for the audience, we're going to try and capture some live questions in the last 10 minutes or so. So please feed them through the Q&A. And Maya, I'll go to you as we wrap. Helen, did you want to add some thoughts from the brand perspective?
Well, I just want to add that I agree with everything everyone said. And on top of that, I think we know that when we market to women, we can't just paint everything pink. And I do think there's a bit of that risk right now where, there's a movement for diversity, which is a great thing. But if we don't have the Bills and Devikas there, it can actually go the other way where it will make us not feel included. It will make us feel like we're being pandered to. And so, I always love to mention an example that financial services, we need to serve women investors better in our business. And we have been so underrepresented in our field representation. And now we're getting more and more. And now we understand to talk to women, it's not about the color of the picture. It's not about showing them. It is about the fact that they live longer than men. That is a real fact. And they worry about things that men don't worry about. How do we address that? And I would love to see that played out everywhere in marketing, advertising, in media. I think that's how we can better serve AAPI and all people of color who are underrepresented. Well,
on that note, speaking of underrepresentation across all people of color, from a DE&I perspective, can any order share kind of the initiatives that that you're working on within your own companies and maybe something that you can share that's been successful that our audience can learn from? Cynthia, do you want to kick that off?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, I agree with all the panelists were saying there are two reasons why we do this, right? First and foremost, there's a close business correlation between the business growth and the representation of the DEI. The second piece is that we always say in marketing, advertising, we say consumer-centric. So whatever you do have to represent your consumer base. So if you don't have DEI, that is not a true representation. It's not modern marketing, right? So what we have done are twofold. First and foremost, within our company, all the major brands, we have to write a purpose. What is the purpose? So it's not only about selling products. What is a high order purpose? And part of that is a DEI. Now doing that, we also need to be careful because it's not because now we think about DEI and we fake DEI and there's not the reason for that. So we gotta be very, very careful about that. And the second piece is about when we work with our agency partners, it's a mandate that our agency partners must be diversified. And certainly, even the complexion of our leadership team, we're not there yet, right? But we're certainly on the way to get to both a female leadership, but also diversified leadership, right? So it's both from internally, how do we build a brand? Secondly, is how do we build a leadership team which represent the complexion of the society? At the same time, we demand our agency partners, not only agencies, but also all the other supplies is diversified. So those are the things that we have been doing. And we got a lot of really warm, welcoming messaging from our partners. We have not seen the end results yet, but certainly at the early stage, we see the positive feedback.
Great to hear. Anyone else want to share some of the initiatives in there? Dev, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I guess this would be to all my client friends on this panel. We need to do this together because I think what happens very often is, let's just say we get a working mom, right? We're talking about diversity of all kinds. That means people have family situations. That means when we get the right kind of people, their lives have to be taken into consideration. I want to put people into positions earlier and faster than the traditional norms may have been. But then when they go to a meeting and they're slightly nervous, we all need to work together. right? To lift them up and not then, you know, just say that, oh my God, they're not up to it. I know, but if we all hold hands, that's the only way we're going to raise up the next crew of diverse talent in the industry. The same thing for a director, the same thing for a producer, right? We've got to go dig deeper, but that means we all hold hands and acknowledge that we are going to do a little bit of teaching on the job, that person's not going to come equipped with all the skills, right? That's sort of a super important thing to me, because that's why sometimes it sort of breaks in the chain. We all have to do it together.
I agree totally with Dev. And I'm so proud of Omnicom, Publicis, Havas, Interpublic, WPP, because I think a lot of those holding companies are now working very closely with companies. I know Interpublic is working very closely with Verizon to bring people in early. And so I'm really excited that Dev said that, because we don't bring young people in early enough, like these Gen Zers and younger millennials. They're going to be part of the solution, and the best way for them to be part of the solution and problem solving is pull them in earlier. We also have to make sure that we're watching what's happening on the back end. We're really good at recruiting Asian Americans, Black, Latinx, LGBT folks, Indigenous folks, but they leave out the back door. And so some of the companies are really focusing heavily on that, but we cannot do this alone as agencies. We need our client partners like Charles Schwab and you know, Cynthia's organization and all these others to hold us accountable, but we hold each other accountable to make sure that we can move the needle on diversity and inclusion and equity.
Well said, well said. Just a reminder for the audience, there's some questions come into the Q&A box, and I'm going to answer some of them in a second. Did anyone else have anything else to add on the topic of DE&I?
Yeah, I had a couple of comments. You know, one, I think from a brand and company perspective, you know, a lot of the things that sometimes people may underestimate how powerful it is to just examine what some of the company policies are. It is a stunning thing when you start to examine what does and doesn't exist when you're looking at equity. There were some things that when I was at Samsung that we started looking at that, quite frankly, they just weren't equitable. And because of the fact that in the AAPI community, there was just this reluctance for some people to step forward, we didn't have an employee resource group. And it's one of the things that, because people were quiet, and it was something that we're like, how is this possible? And so that was one of the first things we were like, of all companies. And so that was one of the first things that it was like, we have to get this started. And then the other thing that happened during Black Lives Matter is we just had to have listening sessions. And again, from a company culture, that's just not something that had really been done inside of Samsung. It's not something that was a part of the culture normally. And so it was a new era. It's something that we started with my last CEO. And so we started doing those. And it sent ripples through the organization, just like as I was reading an article on Goldman Sachs. The fact that companies who'd never done it before started having employee listening sessions with different groups, it's just to listen and then to allow employees who haven't been heard and to do it at the top. And then when the top leader does it, it sends a message through the ranks. If the CEO is doing it, hey, VPs, I think that means that you better be doing this with your teams. And then one of the things that I started doing as well is I would just pick up the phone and call some of my underrepresented people in my teams. It was unexpected. They didn't realize there was no one-on-one meeting that had been booked. So not only did I have small group sessions, but I just called some of my people and said, I was checking on them. Obviously we had a pandemic going on, but I was checking on them for just their overall health to see, how are you doing? And I think that kind of need for leaders to show up differently, to show that you care for underrepresented members of your team is a different statement that leaders are going to have to do to see what they need. And I think that's kind of where its business has gone now. And it's a different call to action for members of management in order to show like, what would we do differently? And so I think the short answer is, I don't know that all companies have a quick, short answer on this is the fix, but this is how management in companies is going to have to think differently about what will happen. And then as you start doing that, you're going to find bright gems inside of these companies. You're going to be like, that's a person I need to elevate. And that's where you're going to find these new stars to be able to pull up inside your organization and say, there's somebody I'm going to be able to bring up into my leadership team, and I'm going to find a new role for them. And there won't be a single career path to move them forward, but that's how you'll do it, is you'll find these people by doing untraditional methods of like figuring out who should be rising. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think every company, most companies are taking on some type of formalized DEI initiative that involves training or messaging or sponsorship of some kind. But I think your point about how leaders show up and really sparking dialogue when it never existed before, to have the tougher conversations about race. And the one-on-ones, I did the same thing that you did and tried to reach out to folks, hosting roundtables to specifically issues of diversity. I think it's not something that I certainly have experienced in my career. And I can tell you proudly at our virtual global sales conference at Nielsen, we had 3 sessions on diversity, equity, and inclusion on day 2 of our meeting. And that was the first time I think I've attended any diversity sessions at any sales conference in my career. So I want to take one question to Wanda's point from the audience, because you mentioned the Black Lives Matter movement and how the BLM movement is holding companies in our industry accountable for change that they promised, right? There was a lot of sponsorship and commitment. How do we gauge progress for the AAPI community? I'll throw it out there. And anybody want to take that one? Anyway.
Well, I'll mention something the company is doing. It doesn't answer the question directly, but I think it does get to the heart of the question, which is what actions are we really taking to help elevate people of all colors and all people who feel like they haven't had a seat at the table. We are doing what the ERG mentorship program, I think that's what they call it. So the idea that we have ERGs, that's been great. We have many ERGs and they're very active. However, there hasn't been a systemic way to give exposure, give visibility to the folks in the ERG, to the highest ranking officers of the company. And so we started this program where they look for volunteers of SVPs mostly and ask us to lead mentoring groups. And I was pretty hesitant in the beginning, like a mentoring group, that sort of defeats the purpose of mentoring. It's usually one-on-one, but it was the most fantastic experience for the attendees because what they got was visibility to a senior leader, which is great. But the other thing that they got was visibility and networking across the company. And that was one thing I learned. And one of the things that you don't learn when you're not in the club is that you need to network. And one of the best ways to network when you're like not in the highest ranking officers is to network with your peers. And sometimes you don't know who your peers are that you can be networking with. And so I think a program like that can go a long way. It's not everything, but it's a really good beginning.
I have, so in my mind, the first level is hate crimes. We talked about hate crimes increased about 164%. So first one was I want to see that the livelihoods, the lives are saved, right? So that is the first stop. Before we do any networking, all this kind of stuff, we need to stop that, right? We're gonna go down. I cannot be worried about that my uncle, my aunt will be on the street being attacked and people just watching. And that is absolutely, it gets me emotional every time when I see this, right? Then once we get that down, I want to see KPI is very, very easy to set. KPIs want to see that senior leadership, what percent of senior leadership from what to what? The board opportunities from what to what. So that's very easy. For me, it's also, like Alan said, what are the 2 or 3 things we want to do to march towards? I think to summarize that, I'm gonna be a little bit cheesy and cheeky, is be a helper. Be a helper in 3 ways. One is create the awareness. Awareness, not only the senior leaders, but also celebrate the younger talent, the deaf Bill we're talking about, younger talent, create that awareness, but also push them forward. The second piece is education. I think still there's so much myth about Asian Americans. I think I actually understand, the other races better, but there's a lot of people in the United States, they don't necessarily understand Asian Americans. There's lots of myths. So how can we help and educate? Last but not least, the next level is networking. If you're not in the club, let's build a club ourselves. Let's help each other. Let's elevate each other. Yeah. But first and foremost, before we do anything else, we need to make sure that legislation works. We need to make sure that we're not worried about our lives. So life first, then livelihoods.
That's great. And Cynthia kicked off kind of our closing question because we're out of time. I can't believe it. I could go on for a couple of more hours, but I think Cynthia kicked off a great way to close out. As you guys know, we're going to ask you for a key takeaway or action item for our attendees. Dev, you started, so you want to go next?
Wait, what's your question? Sorry.
Your key takeaway or action item for the audience?
The one thing that I always tell everybody in any issue that requires change, it is going to take a while, and do not give up. It is going to take a while, but do not give up. Awesome.
Bill?
I just want to say that we have to go beyond storytelling and go to story doing. We could make statements, but now we have to take action. So whatever people can do, even if it's simple, take a step to make a change, and that would make a big difference.
Awesome. Helen?
I would say do the hard work, lean into the stereotype, make something of the strength that people already perceive you have, and then make the ask to rise more.
Great. Wanda?
I think we should reconvene the panel in, say, 6 months. And let's get back together and track the items that we've been talking about and see what happened.
Amazing. I love that idea. Ad Club, I hope you're listening. Before I kick it off to Aisha, I'll share my 3 quick bullets that I took from this panel. And I say them all the time. If you're seeking a career in leadership or pursuing executive leadership, speak up, make it known that you're interested in pursuing a leadership role. Be seen. Connections are currency, right? So, you need to network both internally and externally to make sure your brand and you're building your own brand, and then take action, right? Leaders are doers, not talkers. With that, I want to thank our panelists. Let's give them a big virtual round of applause. I'm humbled and honored to be here today. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you. Thank you for being an excellent moderator.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Deb.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you guys for all being here. And thank you to our attendees. And Aisha, I'll kick it back to you.
Thank you, Rick.
Wow, what an amazing panel and discussion. I hope you all left feeling really insightful and really inspired. So thank you all for joining us today. The club is committed to continuing the conversation around supporting the AAPI community. Stay tuned for more discussions and initiatives as it relates to our AAPI members. A special thank you to our wonderful panelists for sharing their perspectives and journeys with us all. Last but not least, if you aren't already, be sure to become a member at theadvertisingclub.org for great content and to watch this recorded conversation. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, Aisha.